We just finished the first semester, so the first 2 quarters. The fund is up 22%, market's up 16%. We're outperforming by 6%. Actually, this is the first time we're outperforming this year. So we had a really good run in the last couple of days of the quarter and also finished extremely well into the beginning of the second quarter. So I don't recall exactly what our number was at the end of the second quarter, but that's for another podcast. I think this episode here is meant to give an overview of the year, what's going on, where we think we are, and what, of course, the big questions are. So we had a huge underperformance by Tesla, which has been almost negated by now. Tesla is back to almost flat for the year and still a little bit underperforming the market, but of course, extremely good given where the company was only, let's say, 5 months ago. So into the sort of end of January, I was in Europe back then, and I remember the conversations and also the episodes that I published that we had. It was tough because Tesla had a growth problem, Tesla had a margin problem, and it was really difficult to discern why people just aren't buying EVs and why people aren't buying electric cars. So I'm going to talk about this now, where we stand. Of course, the picture is much better now. We had a really, really good quarterly update by Tesla for second quarter. That's very encouraging. I'm going to share more on that. So the second part is, of course, Nvidia. That's been the success story of the year, not just for us, but for anybody who's involved. Now, this is, of course, a broader question. It's a broader question in following sense. First, you have to understand what Nvidia is doing and why the company is so valuable. Second, you have to have a little bit of a sense for where this is going. We don't predict the future and we don't deal with uncertainties in the future. What we're trying to do here is actually understand what's not changing and really fix on those. So this is roughly the headline for this episode. Again, it's not a formal review of the second quarter or anything like that. It's just a state of the union. That's where we stand. That's what we think we need to focus on and really laser focus on things that don't change. This is not even on podcast. It's July 4th, 2024. This is Krim Dalko. For the year, the fund is up 22%. The market is up 16%. We're outperforming by 6%. Let's start with Tesla. We had a very encouraging quarterly update. 445,000 cars were delivered, beats expectations, reduces inventory. Overall, a really good number given the expectations and given where we stand in the Tesla story. Now, let me recap a little bit what the actual points are, what the bullet points are that we're all caring about. So first, there's volume growth. Tesla is still growing volumes, although year over year, we're still slightly down, actually. But we had a huge boost in the second quarter, which sets us up good for the second half. Tesla has been very aggressive at pricing, continuously very aggressive at pricing. And this brings me to the actual most important parts of the car volume story of Tesla. There's a couple of other stories with Tesla, in particular AI, FSD, and humanoid robot, and then there's also energy storage. Let's just stay with the actual car business. So we don't want to deal with uncertainties, as we said. We want to focus on what doesn't change. What doesn't change is that people will buy cars that are at lower cost and higher quality. And this is what we think Tesla has to do and is doing relentlessly. Lowering the cost, increasing the quality. Now, quality is a big word. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. To us, it means primarily that we can reduce the cost per mile. This is what really matters to people when they buy any kind of transportation. It's cost per mile. Whether you pay it through Uber, whether you pay it through your own car, whether you pay it through flying somewhere or taking a train or taking a car, it is going to be cost per mile. Cost per mile, if you go on vacation with a family of 4 and you fly somewhere, you're going to do that calculation versus your car. Of course, at some point, the cost per mile is just going to be extraordinarily high just because there's too many miles to be driven and so on and so forth. But the point here is that as long as Tesla is working on those vectors, we believe that in the long run, they will be able to disrupt the automotive market to the extent that Apple has disrupted the telco market or Cisco has disrupted the telco market 30 years ago. or Nvidia has disrupted the data center market, and so on and so forth. The reason is always driven by cost and or by quality. Now, cost and quality are two sides of the same coin. You can't just say Tesla has cheaper cars. That's not enough. There's plenty of cheap cars available. You have to deliver a lower cost at higher quality. This is how disruption works. This is the P times Q equation that Peter Thiel likes to point out, which is, look, in order to add value to society, which is P, and then Q is what you can actually garner from that. So the value that you create for society times the value that you actually get for yourself. This is really the value that you're going to produce for shareholders. And we believe that this relationship should be at least 5 to up to 10x. So you should, for every dollar that you keep or every dollar of market cap that you make, you should be making 5 to 10 times more money for society. And this is a good gauge. So if you have a company like let's say Nvidia that has added $2 trillion in market cap, you can say, well, that means that you're telling me that Nvidia is adding $20 trillion worth of value to society. Well, that's actually very plausible, because you have all the models that are currently in production, from ChatGPT to Claude, all the way to the multimodal models in robotics, and vision language models, and vision to text models. All of those things together, if you say that they will increase productivity globally by 10%, then you're already there, right? This is roughly what we're talking about. Now, you can say, well, yeah, but it's not all going to Nvidia. Well, right now, it's going mostly to Nvidia because Nvidia is a monopolistic provider of tokens. That's what Nvidia really, that's the business of Nvidia, is to deliver tokens. Now, you see, I'm talking about Nvidia. I apologize, because this was supposed to be about Tesla. So I'm going to digress here and stay with Tesla and then go to Nvidia in the second part. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have lower costs at higher quality, and that's what Tesla continuously is driving for, and that's why we believe that there is a good chance that Tesla will keep growing volumes, maybe between 50 and 50%, depending on the quarter and the year, but that's roughly where we think Tesla lives. Now, the second part of the Tesla story is FSD, AI. Why are we interested in that? Well, because that is unlocking a massive market on several dimensions, right? It first makes driving safer and easier, but it also offers new products. That's really what matters. So you have the ability to send your car somewhere and pick up somebody up, and you don't have to have 2 or 3 cars per family. You can do some things like maybe get drunk and then just drive back with your full self drive. So there's a lot of opportunity on those types of fronts that can be unlocked, and we believe that there is plenty of revenue opportunity for Tesla in that. Why is Tesla a leader in the space? Well, because they have the data. We've discussed this before. The real power of any kind of AI company is always going to be in the data. And the reason it's in the data is because, AI is really a transformation of a data pipeline into a compressed knowledge base that can be exploited through inference for general purposes. And if you have the right data, then you can train your robot, in this case, to do whatever it's supposed to do. In the case of Tesla, it's to be able to drive. The next story is, of course, the humanoid robot. We've spoken about this in the context of CVPR, which, by the way, we're not done. We're going to talk a lot more about CVPR. We're just a little bit in a deadlock here. Also, we're right now in Croatia. It's a bit of a vacation situation with family, so it's not that much time to work. Also working on finalizing the trolley economics essay, which I want to hopefully be able to publish in the next 2 days. So anyway, that's why we're a bit falling behind with the CVPR recap. But CVPR has really opened our eyes for the opportunity for robotics, the opportunity for simulation as a driver for robotics. A lot of vectors there, and a lot of interesting opportunities for embodied decision-making agents. Lastly, on the Tesla story, we want to talk about storage, energy storage. That's kind of sort of almost like a hidden opportunity because it's hard to understate, it's hard to overstate how important this could be. Let's not forget, this could be a big business for Tesla. It's not right now relative to the size of the company. They had a run rate, they are now at the run, so they printed around 9 gigawatt of energy storage products in the second quarter. That's a run rate of 36 gigawatts, which is 90% of Lathrop's capacity. Now, we know the business is lumpy and things like that, but let's be clear. If we have 40 gigawatts of Lathrop fully utilized at a 20% gross margin, I don't have the numbers on top of my head, but this starts to becoming interesting. And of course, this is just the beginning. Now, what does energy storage actually mean? Well, energy storage is, if you will, it's really close to what storage means in the compute world. Storage, memory, those things are the cousins of compute that really make compute work, right? I mean, a lot of the work that Nvidia is doing on the compute side are actually is actually driven by managing memory, high bandwidth memory, in I/O energy, things like that. I'm going to talk about Nvidia in a second, but I just want to say that, look, storing stuff for the purpose of using it later in a more distributed, more flexible way, whether it's electricity, whether it's tokens, whether it's bits, is always going to be a very powerful business model, and Tesla is in the midst of it. Tesla, in many ways, is a distributed compute company, and distributed compute, if you can replace distributed with energy, actually, and just call it, look, it's distributed energy, which is being driven by compute. So there's a lot of opportunity there. The numbers, again, they don't stack up as much as they do, let's say, with FSD and robotaxi. But let's not underestimate this part of the market. And it's certainly something that, in my opinion, is not priced properly in the stock. So there's definitely some support on that side. So there's, of course, a lot of questions coming from all kinds of parties. Well, is this an overdone, the upside in Tesla? Well, first of all, there is actually still, the stock's still down for the year. So we're not really talking about any kind of crazy stock run. Valuations are high. That's a different story. I'm not going to sit here and argue that trading at the kinds of valuations that it's trading right now, which roughly is, we're talking about 8.5, 9 times sales for an industrial company, of course, is a massive multiple. But again, given all the vectors that are showing in the right direction, I think valuation with Tesla in the long run actually looks very interesting, because if you look at it from a P times Q perspective, so how much value they can add to society through having distributed transportation driven by AI, having the Optimus robot, and having energy storage and distributed energy, those are $1 trillion size markets that Tesla is capturing, and then they get their share out of that. So we can definitely justify the valuation in some DCF calculation. Now let's talk about, okay, before I go to Nvidia, just let's finish with the Optimus side of things. I think we've talked about this at length already, but let's just reiterate the big upside in Optimus is the idea that we have transfer learning. That means that we can learn from the driving onto Optimus, because navigation is at the core of most of robotics problems. This is the key thesis, and as we sit here in July 4, 2024, all we can say is that the science and the technology are rapidly converging to an opportunity that maybe this can be transferred into revenue-generating products and service, and that will accrue to Tesla. Now let's talk about Nvidia. I started already on this call talking about the interesting part of the Nvidia story. I would say there's a lot of, there's, of course, given the run of the stock, which has done about 150% year to date, the fact that Nvidia is the largest company in the world, there's a lot of voices out there, rightly so, they're questioning this run. There are people trying to capture, sort of write the kinds of blogs that they can go afterwards and say, I told you so, assuming that Nvidia will return to some lower level. I'm okay with all of that. This is how markets work. This is always what happens. When you have a run like this, people are skeptical and people try to make money on both sides. At least try to make money of being the guru that predicted the peak of Nvidia. And of course, words are cheap, so you have a lot of blogs and reports and things like that that are predicting that. Now, our view on Nvidia is that the risk to Nvidia is continuously on the upside. It's been like that for the last 10 years, and there's absolutely no reason that this will change. I think the markets have been completely incapable of assessing the potential of Nvidia. Just look at the stock evolution, and there's no reason to believe that this will change. The same way nobody has predicted large language models and the impact that these types of training methodologies will have on Nvidia. Nobody is even talking about the multimodal embodied agent type training that is right now happening, that people are investing in massively. And then there's also the whole simulation, which is coming online for embodied decision-making agents and others, but mainly for that. So there's plenty of room to the upside for Nvidia, and the risk to Nvidia is continuously to the upside. Numbers are difficult to digest. You know, when something is $3 trillion and it's the largest company in the world, people start having difficulties. It's just human nature to be bounded by, well, how can this be? And this has never happened before. Well, duh, yeah. Most things that are interesting have never happened before. I want to be careful, like just try to stay grounded in the following way. There has to be a relationship between the business of Nvidia and the demand that people have for products and services that are related to Nvidia. There has to be. Otherwise, this whole story will not make any sense. Now, so far, this has been the case. The Nvidia numbers have been growing dramatically, so clearly there is demand for their products. Now, you could argue, well, maybe that's just a bubble. People are forced into buying all the stuff and they don't know what to do with it, right? You could argue that way. You could say, okay, fine. Nvidia is not like I don't know, companies, whatever, pets.com back in the internet bubble, or maybe in the more modern times, companies like Slack or Dropbox or whatever, which everybody is like so excited about, but then the actual business is not really growing, and then the stock just doesn't do anything. This is not the case here. Then you could have companies like Uber or Airbnb, which are growing but not making any money because the unit economics are not working. So every unit of volume that they're adding just adds another unit of volume. And there's no cash flow or barely any cash flow growth and no earnings growth. That's not the case here either. So Nvidia is ticking all the boxes, and that's part why it's trading at such high valuations. Now, valuations, by the way, are not even that high, but it's of course high if you say this kind of growth will not continue, then it's high. So we're back to the story of, okay, is this growth sustainable or not? We want to actually question the most fundamental premise of the Nvidia business, which is, what is the value to the customer base of Nvidia? That's the question. Because as long as there's value for people, if people want to pay for AI, and by the way, paying for AI is, on the one hand, paying money for it, like people subscribe to OpenAI, people subscribe to FSD, but there's also other ways to pay for AI. For example, using it and not buying something else. It might not accrue directly to the provider of the AI product, but you're still saving money, right? So if my brother wants to run his doctor practice and spare himself a secretary because he can use, ChatGPT, then he is spending a little bit of money, of course, on ChatGPT, but he is saving a lot of money by not hiring a secretary, and he might be able to even get rid of his radiologist, and he could get rid of a lot of other people because he's a surgeon, and those types of people will in the end be the ones that probably will be replaced for last, because we're just going to have a person talk to us before we let them cut us open. So having said all of this, what I'm trying to say here is that the value that Nvidia is the value that AI is providing to society can be measured in the trillions. No question about that. If you take, just as a rough assumption, a 10% productivity increase, a one-time 10% productivity increase on global GDP of 100 trillion, that's $10 trillion. That is a one-time $10 trillion increase in productivity. Then, there you go. That's a $10 trillion number. If Nvidia gets, 10% of that, that's 1 trillion in revenue. So you see where my numbers are going. Now you're going to tell me, but Karim, there's, what are you talking about? Tesla's making a couple $1 billion with FSD. OpenAI is making a couple $1 billion. That's it. So there's no trillions here. Yes, but I just said, if my brother uses AI and he can spare himself a secretary, that's value. And that value is going to be invested one way or the other in better models. There is demand for better models because we do appreciate intelligence in artificial form because it's making our lives a lot easier. It's making our boring jobs a lot easier. Our cognitive jobs that are actually boring, sort of conveyor belt type jobs, it's making those jobs easier. And I have yet to see somebody being forced with a gun on her head to use AI, whether it's ChatGPT or FSD or whatever. People love it. People love that stuff. Some don't. Some are against all this, but most people do. So, and the impact that this has on lower income, less fortunate, less resourceful people cannot be underestimated. I mean, you can have literally digital nomads popping up in places like El Salvador, in Bitcoin Beach, or places like that. And they can really build an infrastructure there of a real economy and do things, whatever that may be, whether it's crypto related or whether it's directly AI related, or even just building support businesses for banks in Europe or whatever it may be. There's so much opportunity around this AI business, and it's all driven by the build out of the infrastructure. Now, let me be specific about Nvidia, because you could have said all of those things that I just said, and then you could tell me, well, but then there's, the competitive aspect of things. So there's no way this is a commodity. Compute is a commodity. I just read, my partner sent me a note from Sequoia where there's a cardinal mistake that people are making. They said that, compute per hour, which is how GPUs are measured, is a commodity. That's true. Compute per hour is a commodity, but token per dollar is not. Token per dollar is not a commodity because there's only one company which can deliver, or in other words, the token per hour advantage that Nvidia has, token per dollar, is exponentially increasing. So the competitive, delta, if you will, between Nvidia and the rest of the world is actually increasing exponentially because they're able to deliver token per dollar at a much, much faster rate than anybody else. Now, what does token per dollar mean? It means that the infrastructure that Nvidia is building out, maybe it actually does cost more for the metal, and the Nvidia bills are going up to customers. But what they're getting out of it is also going up at a much, much faster rate. That's what token per dollar actually means. Now, token is the sort of unit of value that we're getting. It's a string. It's really just a string of numbers. And the way transformers are trained and the architecture of transformer is structured is that everything is predicated on tokens. And the more tokens we have per second or per dollar, the more we can get out of these models, whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's a robot, FSD, or whatever it may be. And the reason this is so powerful is because other than some of the large language models, actually most other AI, in particular the embodied AI, hasn't even started fully exploiting the transformer architecture. So we're just at the beginning of this wave of token per dollar racing that Nvidia is way, way ahead. Just let me give you a few anecdotes just to sort of round up this episode. Why is Nvidia so ahead in token per dollar? Well, because these things are tough. We heard anecdotes all over the place. For example, when xAI, so the Elon Musk company that used to be called Twitter, when they bought their cluster of GPUs, they tweeted that this stuff is very difficult, it's very complicated, and you can't just put the GPUs in a room and run it. Like, you have to connect them, you have to program them, you have to optimize them, you have to make sure, very important, that the memory budget fits the architecture and the compute, so you don't have too many IOs, because otherwise your memory budget and your energy budget explodes. I just listened to a conversation between people from Databricks, which is an AI infrastructure provider. They spoke about the mistakes that are happening increasingly, mistakes that GPUs are making. By the way, not because Nvidia is bad at making them, it's just because the energy budget is so high, and under these types of energy pressures, mistakes may, bit flips happen, and this, goes back to Onur Mutlu and computer architecture. We've spoken about this at length. What I want to mention here is just that it's not just about buying your, Cerberus or Grok or AMD or whatever chip that you can get for maybe 10 cents on the dollar or 20 cents on the dollar, put them in a room and then run that thing. It's the whole thing, and it has to be optimized. And of course, the programmability has to be going with the models. Also, that's important. That's another whole different story, if you will, another box I could open here and have a 20-minute conversation about the problem of having accelerators like TPUs and Dojo and all these accelerators, and the question why they aren't able to replace Nvidia. Well, the problem is that the accelerator hardware, as good as it is, often is not supported by enough software, in particular the compiler side of things and libraries and things like that. And then you're stuck with a really fast Ferrari motor that just doesn't get the kind of fuel that it needs to run at the speed, versus Nvidia is a fully integrated Ferrari motor that grows with the fuel, that grows with the motor, that grows with all the components that are necessary. And that's why Nvidia is so strong. So all of this is to say that we are very comfortable with the Nvidia story, because the risk keeps going to the upside. And as crazy as it sounds, after 150% performance, after $3 trillion of market cap, and therefore largest company in the world, still to say Nvidia risks to the upside. Well, it's to the upside because if people at Sequoia, which we don't have a lot of respect for, but still it's Sequoia, so this is a Silicon Valley investment shop, and they don't understand it. They still talk about compute per hour. They don't understand some fundamental questions of AI and the fact that it's token per dollar, not compute per hour. That shows you how far behind everybody else is, and that explains why Nvidia stock keeps surprising to the upside. To summarize, the State of the Union first half of the 2024 has been a good half for us. We're up 22%. We're outperforming by 6%. Yes, we had a tough beginning of the year, and we went through this. I think for people that listen to this podcast series, have been listening for a while, I hope this is a good lesson for what it means to run a hedge fund, which is the purpose of this podcast series. You really are struggling. Sometimes you have to deal with volatility, and instead of getting obsessed with all the uncertainty that encompasses your business, keep laser focused on things that don't change. And what doesn't change is lower cost and higher quality. And both Tesla and Nvidia are at the forefront in their markets with these vectors. Thank you.